morning, everybody. What we're going to be focusing on today is the informal economy and how thinking about merging or collaborating with the informal economy into the formal can bring some very interesting opportunities and bring us to some very interesting areas. What we will do in this paper is also to talk about a case study and share that example. And finally, end by talking about how organizations can think about integrating the informal economy. So the intention of this paper is not to really provide a solution, thanks. Yeah, but to actually open the conversation to think about how we can collaborate or think about the informal economy in a commercial world. Let's take a look at informal economy and what is that all about. So all of us who are keeping up late at night downloading content on BitTorrent are part of this informal economy. Street vendors that we buy fruits and vegetables from are part of this. Women who cook their cakes to sell or make clothes to sell are part of the informal economy as well. Qualitative recruiters, freelancers who work in the system. And more interestingly, in modern times, open source platforms are part of the informal economy. And there are very good examples of this, such as Kickstarter. Okay? So if we look at all the characteristics of the informal economy, what defines it is, of course, that there is no formal structure within the informal economy. Often there is an aspect of illegality because the income is not reported to the government. And it's survival-driven or subsistence-driven. Now what we're seeing, a lot of it is expanding into the developed markets as well, especially in Europe, for many different reasons, which we're not going to go into today. But what is interesting is that there's an increasing thought around the idea of informality and what does that mean and how we can think about it not as boundaries of them and us, informal and formal, but look at it differently. So why is it important for us to look at the informal economy? The informal economy is the fastest growing part of the global economy. Today, it is estimated to be at about 10 trillion. Half of the world's employable population currently works off the books. And this is really important. It's going to expand. It's going to get bigger. And in Asia especially, it's really important. And in emerging markets, this is really important. There are many different types of innovation that the informal economy contributes to, and it has become part of innovation science, called in many different ways, be it Jugaad, bottom of the pyramid, inclusive innovation, etc. Here you see just a very basic example of the soda bottle bulbs, and I'm not sure how many people know about this, but this is a Brazilian, Mr. Moser, who thought about the soda bottle, which is a plastic bottle with some concoction, including bleach, put into the roof, and the sun shines through that bottle and lights up the entire room. Now, this is going to be in 1 million homes by the beginning of next year. Okay? So the informal economy is contributing very substantially to the world that we live in. What we're going to look at now is a case study which kind of brought us to this world and how that helped us and raised certain interesting opportunities for us. This is a case study where we worked with architecture. Architecture is a product and service innovation company, and their role was to help through this process of identifying the solutions in this case. So the case was a client, a building management. And this building management was thinking about how they can add value-added services or provide value-added services to their tenants as part of an ongoing process of better service. Obviously, the important aspect in all of this was that it needed to be at a low cost to the building management. Now, they were already providing quite a few services to their tenants. For example, food services, cleaning services, building maintenance, etc. So those were not really things that were being considered. As part of the early stages of problem identification, we looked at different other services that they could think about, like childcare, entertainment, counseling, etc. And there was one particular service, these were all expensive. So there was one particular service which stood out, and that was recycling. Now, why recycling? So recycling is something that was being done in a very informal way in this building. And so there was an opportunity to begin to think about this as a value-added service at low cost to the client. Besides that, of course, it had the benefit of providing an image of an environment-friendly building. And in today's day and time, that's a really important image variable that the client could think of working on. And so that's why we began to think about the idea of recycling. We did an early systems kind of overview. And as you can see over here, in the green there, most of that is being serviced by the informal economy, the pushcart aunties, the cleaners, and the garanguni trucks, right? So that was really, the building management was providing very little in terms of waste management. And whatever they were doing was not really visible or understood by their tenants. So we developed the Indent Statement for this project, and that was essentially to say how can we provide value-added services to tenants by making the current informal disposal or recycling system more effective. Obviously to help the tenants, but also to help the informal economy, the aunties and uncles who are part of this sector. What we did was an ethnographic research study. We talked to people, we spent a day in the life of these people, and we also looked at all the different stakeholders across the system. So we spent time observing the client and the key stakeholders involved in this. We looked at the users themselves, and of course the informal service providers themselves. So it was a fairly sort of overall systems perspective to the problem. So let's meet the main character in the story, and that's Auntie. She's known only as Auntie. She's 70 years old, and she works because she does not want to spend most of her time at home. So she spends about 6 hours cleaning offices, and that's her main job. But while she's cleaning, she also collects a lot of the different waste that is available for recycling. Now, you can see there, that's the makeshift cart that she uses to put all her recycled material into. It's just 2 carton boxes which are held together with a rope on a trolley. Also, she's got like that little umbrella to keep her from the heat, and she's got a lot of different things that she can hang and personalize this cart as well. Right. So this was Auntie who was working at the building, and she was the one who we were really following and trying to understand and see how things evolved around Auntie. What came out from this was really the systems map, and what we did find was obviously there was nothing formalized about this. We had disposal of waste by the tenants wherever they thought it was convenient. The management who had random disposal points, and Auntie who was picking up wherever she could, right? So there was clearly a service efficiency gap that existed here. And why was there the service efficiency gap? The gap existed because of the mindset of the tenants. And the mindset of the tenants was really they were reluctant recyclers. They were not interested in disposing of waste. They were just interested in getting rid of it. And so really the attitude was, let's hand it over and then forget about it. And same thing goes with, attitudes of out of sight, out of mind, which is the building management had hidden this in the deep caverns of the building, and nobody knew about this. There was no signage about it as well as the tenants, once they got rid of it, they wanted to forget about it. So there was quite a bit of inconsistency, and as a result of that, there was a lot of waste in terms of the value of the product itself, and a lot of accidental littering that was taking place in the building. So the challenge really was, how do we inform and encourage service users of right disposal habits to optimize recycling? And there was quite a few solutions that were developed out of this. Some of these solutions were short-term solutions, easy to implement solutions like green ambassadors within organizations, or just simple did you know stickers that could help to highlight or bring about visibility of disposal points. There were also more long-term kind of initiatives which were aimed at changing mindsets of tenants, and those were around ideas of boot camps or periodic eco-related events that the building management could organize. Further on, what we did was, so this was already the system that existed in some ways, and the solutions were helping to build on this system, providing better value-added service. But what also came out of it was the opportunity for the building management themselves to monetize some part of the service by offering a cleaning service at a certain value to its tenants as well. And so to begin to think about the business model in a bit different way, where they could think of adding value and using those benefits as well. The other gap that we looked at was a social welfare gap. We've done a sort of workflow following Auntie through the different parts of her process, and I'd just like you to focus on the carry or the transport leg there. And basically, because the aunties are trying to maximize their resources, their key resource being time and their own effort, they would load up these very fragile carts with a lot of paper, and they would carry this for like 3 kilometers to get from the building to the Karanguni truck through heavy traffic in Singapore. And so really safety was a big concern for these service providers. So again, the question was how to improve welfare without compromising on convenience or productivity. And there were solutions which ranged from just developing new push carts for them, or working or collaborating with the government in terms of the different kinds of efforts that could be taken in this direction. Easier solutions as well, like the Auntie Hub or the tenant education on sorting, etc. So lots of different solutions that emerged from those two challenges. Essentially what happened was that the client put together a service proposition, and that service proposition was then implemented, leading to benefit across all the different stakeholders in the system. But what's more important is that it enabled Auntie as well and didn't really affect her source of livelihood. So if I was to go back and look at this, and if we begin to think about the future, there are really 3 questions that come about from that case study, which is, the first one is, does the informal economy exist in my category, and how do I go about identifying it? So really in terms of looking at the informal economy, it's about the inefficiencies that might exist in your product category. In this particular case, we had looked at things like child welfare, counseling, and then recycling was one of those inefficiencies that we dug deeper into. Let's take another example. In the hotel industry, there are a lot of people who prefer the local flavor. They want local insights into where to stay. And that has kind of been the starting point for a company like Airbnb. Homestays are not part of the formal economy, but Airbnb is now. Yeah? So those are just examples of looking at inefficiencies that exist within a system and developing possible solutions or studying that. So the next question is, what should I be looking out for when I'm observing the informal system? And it's really just about activity flows or the hidden touch points across all the different stakeholders. So again, in our case, we had looked at users, the actual service providers, etc. In the case of Airbnb, for example, it would be all the way from conceptualizing the holiday to deciding a destination, to booking a hotel, and all the way till you come back home. Okay, so it's really about trying to identify where value is being created. And that's the perspective to observing that informal system. The final question is, how can I benefit from looking at the informal economy? Now, companies have done a lot of different things in terms of benefiting from the informal economy. One obvious way has been innovations that are addressed at the bottom of the pyramid. It's also by using the informal economy for distribution systems. So FMCG companies do that in terms of providing distribution to remote areas by using makeshift mom and pop kind of shops, right? The informal economy innovation culture has been studied and has been used by organizations as well as a way to capitalize on this. The perspective that we have taken here is somewhat different, which is that we have looked at the idea of integrating the informal economy into a more formal structure and to see what kind of benefits emerge from that. And so here we have seen benefits of better value-added services, improving the culture of recycling within that system, and as well as opportunities for services which can be monetized subsequently. Yeah? So there are lots of different ways to look at that. So that's really the key a point that we are trying to make, which is that today's world is a highly complex world. In fact, the view is that complexity has reached its limit. Formal structures, as we know them, are breaking down. And the future of this world is going to be about informality. It's going to be about simpler systems that are sustainable. And so the reason to look at that and to build on that is really what we should be thinking about. So I'm going to leave you with a quotation from the Japanese author in praise of shadows. And he talks about the idea of the appreciation of shadows and the appreciation of subtlety. And so our point of view is that the consideration of the informal economy in the commercial world is an appreciation of that shadow, and that it can bring to us a lot of innovation opportunities and new ways of looking at things.
I actually think it's a fascinating topic, and I have just 2 weeks ago gave a presentation on the same topic without the beautiful analysis that you've done, but looking at sort of the freedom at the fringes. I wanted to ask a question about how did you come to the conclusion that systematization of the informal economy is the approach that will make it successful, as opposed to leaving an unstructured approach that is sort of the fundamental way that it operates now?
I think it was just driven by necessity to some extent, because at the end of the day there was still a commercial objective to this. But I think in devising the solutions we were very conscious of the fact that it should not in any way take away from the current informal structure, but that it should be adding value to it. So I think it was a lot of self-moderation in some ways to kind of build that, but it had to be done. We didn't really have other options to look at it. Yeah, it was commercially driven.
Just when you look at, so you say you need an economic motivation. I think a lot of times when you're selling products into lower tier markets, or you're looking at distribution systems for consumer products or medical devices in my case, how do you carefully map the economics and know where the money is flowing when this is by definition a gray area? This is a current issue for medical devices.
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult, but generally what works is to look at it from many different angles. And I think your best bet is to begin to think of the idea of triangulating all your ideas or processes, to think of it from the different perspectives. And I think somewhere in the middle of all of that is where the truth lies, right? So I think it's really to sort of begin to look at the dots and then fill up those dots.
You say the informal economy is $10 trillion.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the financials are not reported, so do you know how they got that figure?
Yeah, I struggled quite a bit to try and find out where the source was. But there has been quite a bit of research that's been done by the World Labor Organizations, etc. And they are the ones who have really tracked this down and began to look at it. So it's more from the World Labor Organization perspective that, yeah, the numbers come from there, yeah.
I think your topic is absolutely fascinating, and I think there are a lot of learnings in emerging markets where the parallel economy or the informal economy plays a large role. I mean, I think the very well-documented case study of the way food is delivered in Bombay, using the dabbawalas as that, is an excellent example of that.
Yep.
Also the genesis of microfinance on the way some companies like Unilever used it to, to distribute their products as well as to kind of enforce and get some kind of formalization to the microfinance setup, etc. Were also outstanding case studies. I guess, yeah, indeed, a great idea and a great starting point to look at innovation. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I think there are very interesting sort of examples, and what I think is important to think about is that while most of it currently sits at the bottom of the pyramid, it is beginning to go upwards. And that's what we should be thinking about as well, because today's world is very different. We have moved into things like Kickstarter, Airbnb. These are just a couple of examples of how we're no more in the bottom of the pyramid when we are thinking of the informal economy. And the world is changing so fast that going forward, that is going to be the norm. And so now is the time for us to begin to think about how we look at the informal economy. Do we just treat it as something which is in the shadows, or do we want to bring it out and begin to sort of blur the boundaries between the formal and the informal?
I actually would like to take this, take the thought a step forward and say it's not just economy, it's also informal organizations.
Yep.
So for example,
Yeah.
I think the biggest example of success stories are there on the internet, where you have common interest groups, or you have brands like Enfield in India, or a lot of brands like, say, maybe an Auntie in Singapore, who have informal organizations that help to promote a particular cause or a particular event. So I think, yeah, great thought again. Yeah, thanks so much.
How open are the people within this informal economy for taking part in research, sharing what they do and that, or is there a lot of things they don't want to share?
Trust is a big issue when it comes to researching the informal economy. And so, for example, in this particular instance, we had to work quite hard in terms of beginning to get to speak to Auntie. And she, in fact, did not allow us access to all the different parts in that chain. And we had to kind of do spontaneous observations. For example, the Karanguni trucks, they would not talk to us because they had their own system. And so we had to just walk down the roads and observe. And so a lot of it then had to depend upon observations as opposed to talking about it. The other thing that we did was, besides an aspect of monetary incentive to the participants, we just worked together with them to talk through to them at a more personal level first before we even got into the area of saying, can we talk to you about other things? So I think there was a level of building trust, developing a relationship at a more personal level before we went into that.